Good day, everyone. Today I'll be discussing the socio-economic, educational, and political conditions of the Philippines in the 19th century during the Spanish colonial period. The 19th century was a very important time in the Philippine history. It was a period of economic growth but also a time of social inequality, political oppression, and limited education for Filipinos. These conditions deeply affected the daily lives of the people and have awakened Filipino nationalism. It was also during this time that Dr. Jose Rizal lived and witnessed this injustice, which he later exposed through his writings. How did Spanish colonial rule affect the daily lives of Filipinos in the 19th century? Spanish colonial rule greatly affected the daily lives of Filipinos, especially the poor. Filipinos experienced racial discrimination. Spaniards were treated as superior while Filipinos, called Indios, were considered inferior. They were not only equal before the law and often received harsher punishment than Spaniards. Many Filipinos were forced to do polaway servicio or forced labor. Adult Filipino men were required to work on roads, bridges, and buildings for many days each year. Often without proper payment, this caused suffering because it disrupted their farming and family life. The Guardia Civil, which was supposed to maintain peace, often abused its power by harshing farmers to and ordinary people. Justice was slow, expensive, and unfair, especially for poor Filipinos. Friars also had a strong control over towns and owned large haciendas. Many Filipinos became tenants on lands that once belonged to their ancestors. High rents and land disputes caused anger and hardship among the people. Why did education play an important role in the rise of the Filipino nationalism? Education played a very important role in the rise of Filipino nationalism because it opened the minds of Filipinos. During most of the Spanish period, education was controlled by friars and focused mainly on religion. Only elite had access to higher education while most Filipinos were denied this opportunity. However, the Educational Decree of 1863 allowed more Filipinos to attend school. Later, with the opening the Suez Canal in 1869, educated Filipinos were able to study in Spain and Europe. These educated Filipinos were called the Ilustrados. They learned about freedom, equality, and human rights. When they returned to the Philippines, they realized that Filipinos were being treated unfairly. Jose Rizal and other Ilustrados used education and writing to expose the abuses of Spanish rule. Rizal's novel Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo showed corruption, injustice, and oppression, which helped awaken Filipino nationalism among Filipinos. Which social group suffered the most during the 19th century Philippines? The social group that suffered the most during the 19th century was the Indios or the poor native Filipinos. They were at the lowest level of society and experienced the most hardship. They paid heavy taxes, performed forced labor, and worked as tenants on friars' owned lands. They had little access to education and almost no protection under the law. They were victims of racial discrimination, abuse by authorities, and unfair treatment in courts. Unlike Spaniards and mestizos, they had no political power and no voice in government because of poverty, lack of education, and constant oppression. The Indians carried the heaviest burden of Spanish colonial rule. So in conclusion, the 19th century Philippines was a time of economic growth but a deep social injustice. Spanish colonial rule caused suffering through discrimination, forced labor, and abuse of power. Education became a powerful tool that awakened Filipino nationalism, especially through the Ilustrados and the writings of Dr. Jose Rizal. These conditions inspired Filipinos to seek reforms and eventually fight for independence. Understanding these historical conditions helps us appreciate the sacrifice of our heroes and importance of freedom and equality today. Thank you for listening.